What if I told you a 25-year-old estate agent left for a routine viewing on July 28, 1986, and just vanished?
Vanished into thin air.
Her body never found. And for almost 4 decades, the man everyone knew was responsible just refused to confess.
It sounds like fiction, doesn't it? But this is the real heartbreaking story of Suzy Lamplugh.
And it all starts in Fulham, London.
That's right. Suzy Lamplugh. She was 25, blonde, a professional just doing her job. And in her diary that day, there's an entry. It reads, 12.45 Mr. Kipper, 37 Shorrolls OS.
OS meaning outside.
Outside the property. She left for that meeting in the middle of the day, and she never came back.
And the first signs that something was terribly wrong came from her car.
Her car was found about a mile from her office. The doors were unlocked, the handbrake was off, and her keys were gone.
But the most telling detail.
The driver's seat. It was pushed back way too far for her.
Meaning someone else, someone much taller, had driven it last.
Exactly. And then the witness reports started to trickle in. People saw a struggle in a dark BMW. A friend even spotted her driving at 2.45 that afternoon.
But the police made a critical error right at the start, didn't they?
A catastrophic one. They used the wrong photo of her, an old one with dark hair, but she'd just dyed it blonde.
So the witness who saw the blonde woman struggling.
Their account was dismissed.
Yeah.
Then you have a man who tried not once, not twice, but 3 times to report seeing someone dump a big suitcase in a canal.
And he was never interviewed.
Never properly interviewed. It's just unbelievable.
And all of this leads to one man, the prime suspect.
A convicted killer who'd been released from a nearby prison just 3 days before she vanished.
And his prison nickname.
His nickname was Mr. Kipper.
I get
Wow.
chills every time I hear that. And he died in 2024, taking all of his secrets to the grave.
Welcome to Whispers of Crime. Today we're going to walk through the disappearance of Suzy Lamplugh, the timeline of her last known movements, the investigation that was flawed from the very beginning, and the web of evidence that points to one man.
Subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube, and you can follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and all other podcast platforms.
Okay, so to really understand what happened, you have to understand the setup, the context of her job.
Absolutely. Suzy Lamplugh was an estate agent at Sturgis & Sons in Fulham. It's a job that inherently involves meeting strangers, often alone, in empty properties.
A vulnerability that predators can and do exploit.
And that diary entry is the key. 12.45 Mr. Kipper, 37 Shorrolls OS.
We mentioned OS means outside property. That was a safety precaution, right?
It was a standard one. The idea is you meet the client at the gate. You're not trapped inside an empty house waiting for them. But in this case, that very precaution was, well, it was turned against her.
And what she took with her that day really speaks volumes about her expectations, doesn't it? It really does. She took her house and car keys and her purse, which had about 15 pounds and some credit cards. Standard stuff for a quick viewing.
But she left her main handbag at the office.
She left her main bag. And that tells you everything. She expected to be gone for a short time. A brief, professional, completely standard appointment.
She felt secure.
Completely secure. Which means the person on the other end of that phone call, Mr. Kipper, had done a very good job of sounding legitimate.
He used her professionalism against her. It was a calculated trap from the very beginning.
The timeline from witness sightings is tight. At about 12:50 p.m., so just minutes after the appointment time, a witness sees Suzy waiting at the gateway of the property on Shorrolls Road.
Just as planned.
Right. Then, just before 1 o'clock, a neighbor hears some noise, looks out, and sees Suzy and a man leaving the vacant house together.
So they did go inside.
It seems so. They were seen looking back up at the house as if checking the door was locked. The whole thing still looked like a normal viewing.
And what did this man, this supposed Mr. Kipper, look like?
The description is very specific. He was dark-haired, suave, immaculately dressed in a dark charcoal suit. The witness described him as a sort of public school boy type.
So he projected an image of being safe, of being wealthy even.
He did. And then there's the oddest detail of all. He was seen holding a bottle of champagne.
Champagne. To a house viewing.
A bottle of champagne decorated with ribbons.
That's bizarre. What is the thinking there? Is it a prop?
It's 2 things, I think. First, it's a disarming tactic, a celebration. It moves the interaction from purely professional to something more personal very quickly. And second, it's a distraction. You see a well-dressed man with champagne, you're not necessarily looking for signs of danger.
You're not looking at his face quite as closely.
Exactly. After that sighting, they were seen getting into a car. And that was the last time anyone saw Suzy Lamplugh in a context that looked remotely safe.
But that wasn't the last time she was seen that day. The timeline continues, and it gets much, much darker.
It does. Mid-afternoon, near Craven Cottage, the Fulham football stadium, a jogger sees a dark-colored left-hand drive BMW.
Left-hand drive, that's unusual for the UK.
Very. And this car speeds across the road, stops suddenly, and inside, the jogger sees a woman with blonde hair struggling violently with a male driver.
That's what they call fight.
A real struggle, and she was repeatedly pressing the car horn.
A desperate signal, trying to get anyone at all to notice.
The witness said at first they couldn't tell if she was laughing or screaming. It was happening that fast, but they quickly realized it was a serious, violent argument.
That shows just how public this was. This wasn't a quiet abduction. He was losing control of her in broad daylight.
He was. He was having to physically subdue her while also driving the car. It was chaotic and violent.
And then later, the sighting by her friend.
Yes. Around 2:45 p.m., her close friend, Barbara Whitfield, was on her bike and saw Suzy in a car driving north on Fulham Palace Road. There was a male passenger with her.
Did her friend say she looked distressed?
She said Suzy seemed preoccupied talking to the man and didn't see her wave. Because Whitfield knew Suzy personally, her sighting was given a lot of weight. It pins down the timeline.
And finally, her own car is found.
At 10 p.m. that night, her white Ford Fiesta. It's found in Stevenage Road, badly parked, about a mile from her office.
The door's unlocked, handbrake off, keys gone.
All signs of a very quick, careless getaway. But that driver's seat, that was the physical proof.
Pushed all the way back.
Way back. It was undeniable proof that a man, a much taller man, had driven that car and dumped it. And with her purse and the 15 pounds still inside, it also proved the motive wasn't robbery.
It was abduction.
Yeah.
And likely for sexual assault and murder.
The evidence was all there, just hours after she disappeared.
The timeline of what happened to Suzy is horrifying. But the story of what happened next, with the police investigation, is in some ways just as tragic.
It is. The initial investigation was, to be frank, plagued by systemic failures. Failures that probably made the case impossible to solve in the long run.
You mentioned they used the wrong photo, which is just mind-boggling. But the problems ran deeper than that, didn't they?
Much deeper. The entire structure of the inquiry was flawed. I mean, for starters, the main investigation was shut down in October 1987.
Wait, just 15 months after she vanished?
Just 15 months. For a high-profile abduction case with no body, that's an astonishingly short amount of time. It suggests they either ran out of resources or simply ran out of ideas.
Why? What was holding them back?
The technology, or lack thereof. You have to remember, this was the mid-1980s. The entire inquiry was run using a manual index card system.
Index cards. You're not serious.
Completely serious. We're talking about an estimated 26,000 handwritten cards, witness statements, tips, notes, all on individual cards filed in boxes.
How could you possibly cross-reference anything? How could you find a pattern?
You couldn't. Not effectively. Imagine trying to connect a witness description of a man to an alias like Kipper, to a specific card type, a location, and then check all of that against recent prison releases. On paper, it was an impossible task.
A critical lead could just be sitting in a box, completely missed.
And that's almost certainly what happened. This inefficiency led to a huge strategic error. The case was initially treated only as a missing person inquiry.
Not a suspected murder.
Not initially. And that classification is critical. Because it's not treated as a violent crime, it delays the automatic checks on high-risk sexual offenders who were recently released in the area.
If they had classified it as a murder from day one,
they would have immediately checked Wormwood Scrubs Prison, which was right nearby, and they would have found the name John Cannan, released 3 days before Suzy went missing.
So that one decision, that one bit of paperwork, cost them their prime suspect right at the start.
It cost them everything. And let's go back to that hair color blunder, because it's the perfect example of how these small mistakes have huge consequences.
They put out a photo of her with brown hair.
An old photo, yes. But she had recently gone blonde, so that key witness, the jogger who saw the struggle in the BMW.
He described a blonde woman.
And the first officers on the scene just dismissed his account. They thought, well, Suzy Lamplugh has brown hair, so it can't be her.
So their most vital witness, the only person who saw the actual abduction in progress, was ignored.
Ignored. Thrown away. Because of an outdated photo in a file? It's devastating.
And on top of all that, they weren't even listening to Suzy's own family?
No. Her parents told the police that shortly before she vanished, Suzy had mentioned a new man she was seeing. A man from Bristol.
A key geographical clue.
A huge clue. But the early investigation failed to connect that Bristol link to any of their suspects or to anyone recently released from prison. Of course, John Cannan's hometown was Bristol, all the pieces were there, but the system they had was just incapable of putting them together.
So while the original investigation was failing, years later, a new team comes in and starts to build this overwhelming circumstantial case against one person, John Cannan.
That's right. Cannan was arrested in 1987 for the abduction and murder of another woman, Shirley Banks. And when investigators looked at his history, the parallels to Suzy's case were just staggering.
It all comes back to that name in the diary, Mr. Kipper. How did they definitively link that bizarre nickname to him?
It came from his time in prison. Former inmates confirmed it. His nickname was Kipper because he always wore these wide Kipper-style ties.
So it wasn't just some random alias he made up. It was part of his identity.
A very specific part of his prison identity. He was taking a piece of a secret world and using it in his crimes. It's a direct link from the diary to the man.
And the timing of his release, as we said, it's just too perfect to be a coincidence.
It's the anchor of the whole case. Released from Wormwood Scrubs, right near Fulham, on July 25, 1986. 3 days before Suzy disappears on the 28th, he had the means, the motive, and the immediate opportunity.
And he had a method, a playbook he'd used before. Tell me about the house for sale rapist.
This is crucial for establishing his modus operandi. Cannan was the prime suspect in a series of attacks in the West Midlands in the late 70s and early 80s. The attacker was dubbed the house for sale rapist. Over 20 women were assaulted, and the method was identical every time. He would contact an estate agent, arrange a viewing with a lone female agent at an empty property, and then attack her.
So what happened to Suzy wasn't random. It was his signature crime.
It was absolutely his signature. He was in Fulham, going by an alias, arranging viewings. He wasn't looking for a house, he was hunting.
And there were sightings of him right at her office, weren't there?
Yes. A witness later came forward who saw a man matching Cannan's description just staring into the window of the Sturgis & Sons office on the day Suzy vanished.
Scouting his target.
And Suzy worked at a desk right by that window.
And the car. The left-hand drive BMW from the struggle.
Cannan owned a dark left-hand drive BMW. It matched the witness description perfectly. It puts his car, with him in it, at the scene of the violent abduction.
All of this is damning. But the piece of evidence that I think is the most twisted, the most narcissistic, is the license plate.
It's pure psychopathy. So 15 months after Suzy disappears, Cannan murders Shirley Banks. The police find her car hidden in his garage.
And he changed the license plate.
He put a false plate on it. The plate read SLP386S.
Wait.
SLP.
Suzy Lamplugh.
An 86.
The year she disappeared.
That's not evidence. That's a trophy. That's a taunt.
It's him inserting himself into the narrative. And it gets worse. When the detectives were interviewing him about the Banks murder, they hadn't mentioned Suzy's name yet. They asked him about the plate, and he said it could be for Lamplugh.
He brought her up.
He brought her up. He was showing them that he knew that he had the power.
And there's also this thread that suggests it might not have been a purely professional trap, that he might have been stalking her.
This is a really disturbing part of it. Suzy had told relatives she had a new boyfriend, a man from Bristol.
Cannan's hometown.
Exactly. And she told one relative that she was becoming scared of him. And this connects to an incident just 3 days before she vanished, the day Cannan got out of prison.
Correct. On July 25th, the day of his release, Suzy was at a pub in Putney that Cannan was known to frequent. While she was there, her handbag, or at least the contents, went missing.
He stole them.
Investigators believe so. It was his way of getting her personal information, learning her schedule. The pub landlord found her things, and Suzy was scheduled to go back and pick them up at 6 p.m. on the day she disappeared.
So he knew exactly where she was supposed to be later that day. And then after she's gone, there are strange phone calls to the pub.
Yes. A man calls the pub claiming to be a police officer, asking specifically for her diary and checkbook. The police confirmed it wasn't one of their officers.
It was Cannan, trying to clean up any links between them.
It's the behavior of a controlling predator, trying to manage the information flow after the crime. It's all part of the same chilling pattern. Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and all major podcast platforms. We appreciate you liking, sharing, and commenting on this episode. Please drop your review and rating.
Okay, so you have this mountain of circumstantial evidence, the alias, the car, the MO, the license plate. It all points to John Cannan. It seems like an open and shut case. So why was he never charged?
This is the most frustrating part of the whole story. It comes down to the huge gap between what the police were certain of and what the law says you can prove in court.
The standard of beyond a reasonable doubt.
Exactly. And in a case with no body, that standard is incredibly high. You first have to prove that a murder even took place, which is hard without remains, and then you have to tie the suspect to it with evidence that can't be explained away.
But they had physical evidence.
Right.
The DNA from the car.
They did. During a reinvestigation between 2000 and 2002, they found a red Ford Sierra that Cannan had used back in 1986. They tested it for DNA.
And they found Suzy's.
They found partial DNA profiles that matched both Suzy Lamplugh and John Cannan inside that car. It was the physical link they had been desperate for.
That sounds like a smoking gun to me. How on earth do you argue against that?
Well, the defense lawyers, and ultimately the Crown Prosecution Service, argued that it proved contact, but it didn't prove context.
What does that mean?
It means that while the DNA proved both Suzy and Cannan had been in that car at some point, it couldn't prove they were in the car at the same time on the day of the abduction.
So the defense could just create a story. Oh, they knew each other from the pub, he gave her a lift home one night, completely unrelated.
That's exactly the kind of reasonable doubt they could introduce. They could say she was in the car on Monday, he was in it on Wednesday. Because so much time had passed, the DNA couldn't provide a timestamp.
So the very delays caused by the initial flawed investigation are what made the later forensic evidence too weak to use in court.
Precisely. The time gap created a legal loophole that the science couldn't close. And because of that, in 2002, the CPS made the formal decision that there was insufficient evidence to guarantee a conviction.
That must have been absolutely crushing for the detective.
It was. And it led to the police taking a step that was, and still is, almost unheard of in the UK.
They named him publicly.
They held a press conference in November 2002 and publicly named John Cannan as the prime and only suspect in the murder of Suzy Lamplugh. The lead detective, Jim Dickey, basically said, "We can't prove it in court, but we are telling you, the public, this is the man who did it."
It was a conviction by public announcement, a way of getting some kind of justice for the family, even if it wasn't legal justice.
A very powerful and deliberate statement, yes.
And it wasn't just Suzy. The DNA in that same car also linked Cannan to another unsolved murder, didn't it?
It did. The murder of Sandra Court, a 27-year-old who was killed just 2 months before Suzy in May 1986. Hairs matching her DNA were also found in that same red Ford Sierra.
So this car was essentially his mobile crime scene that summer.
It certainly appears that way. And when detectives questioned him about all this, he almost let it slip.
What did he say?
He tried to deflect. He blamed a Bristol businessman for the murders of Shirley Banks, Suzy Lamplugh, and he said another girl.
And the detectives asked if he was that businessman.
They did. And for a split second, he said yes. He affirmed it before catching himself, getting emotional, and ending the interview.
A moment of truth.
A crack in the facade. But he quickly rebuilt the wall. Publicly, he and his solicitor always maintained his innocence, claiming he was the victim of a media witch hunt. He never cracked again.
With a trial off the table, the focus for Suzy's family and for the police must have shifted completely to one thing: finding her, giving her a proper burial.
That became the sole mission. For the family, it was about closure. For the police, finding her body was still the only thing that could potentially reopen the door to a prosecution.
And they had leads, didn't they? Places that Cannan himself had hinted at.
They had a couple of major ones. The first was Norton Barracks, an old army base near Worcester.
And that tip came from someone very close to him.
His ex-girlfriend, Gilly Page. She told police that Cannan had confessed to her that he'd buried Suzy there. So police searched that site multiple times over the years. They brought in ground-penetrating radar, all the latest tech.
But the site itself was a problem.
A huge problem. It had been heavily redeveloped since the 1980s. There were housing estates built on parts of the old barracks. They couldn't just tear down people's homes. So the searches were always inconclusive. They could never fully rule it out.
And then there was the much more recent search, the one that got so much media attention in 2018.
The house in Sutton Coldfield, his mother's former home.
That felt like the last real roll of the dice, the last chance for an answer.
It really did. A new tip came in, and the police went all in. They brought in a team of 15 officers, archaeologists, and they spent 2 weeks digging up the garden, focusing on an area under an old garage.
And after all that hope, all that work.
Nothing, absolutely nothing. It was another dead end, another moment of hope for the Lamplugh family that was just crushed.
It's just incredible that while they're chasing these leads from prison informants decades later, one of the best early leads was just ignored. The man who saw the suitcase being dumped in the canal.
That's the one that still haunts the original investigators. A lorry driver saw a man who looked a lot like Cannan heaving a large, heavy suitcase into the Grand Union Canal at a place called Gallows Bridge.
Gallows Bridge. Even the name is chillingly appropriate for a killer like Cannan.
It fits his pattern. He dumped Shirley Banks's body at a place called Bedwoman's Ditch. He had a flair for the macabre, and the witness tried to report this 3 times.
And was just fobbed off.
He was never taken seriously, never properly interviewed. Detective Jim Dickey later called it the single best piece of information they ever had in the case.
Did they ever go back and search that part of the canal?
The Met Police decided against a specific search, arguing the canal had been dredged for other reasons over the years. But a targeted search of that exact spot, based on that witness statement, never happened. It remains a huge what if.
And so, after all the searches, all the theories, the final chapter wasn't written by the police, but by time.
John Cannan died in prison in November 2024. He was 70 years old. He never confessed. He never gave up the location of Suzy's body.
What was the psychological motive for that silence? Was it just to avoid another life sentence? He was never getting out anyway.
Profilers are certain it was about control. Cannan was a classic psychopath, a control freak. Withholding that one last secret, the location of her body, was his final act of power over Suzy, over her family, and over the police. It was the one thing they wanted that he would never give them.
His own brother said he would take his secrets to the grave.
He did. And in doing so, he denied the Lamplugh family the one thing they had spent 38 years searching for: a chance to say goodbye.
So what does justice even look like when the killer dies unpunished for the crime and the victim is still missing?
Well, the family found a different way to create a legacy, a different kind of justice. In the face of that unimaginable grief and lack of answers, Suzy's parents, Diana and Paul Lamplugh, did something extraordinary. In December 1986, just months after she vanished, they founded the Suzy Lamplugh Trust.
They turned their personal tragedy into a public mission.
An incredibly powerful one. They were awarded OBEs for their work, and they truly pioneered the idea of personal safety as a life skill. They refused to let Suzy's story just be about being a victim.
And they tackled the exact vulnerabilities that led to her abduction, the risks for lone workers.
Exactly. The trust developed safety protocols that are now standard practice. Things like always telling a colleague your exact route and expected return time, working in pairs when possible.
But the most important one seems to be about verifying clients, right? To stop another Mr. Kipper.
That was key. They pushed for rigorous verification protocols. Not just checking an ID when you meet someone, but calling a client back on a number you can verify independently, like from a phone book or a company website. It makes it much harder for a predator to use an alias and a disposable phone.
They shifted the responsibility for safety from the individual onto the employer.
Precisely. They made lone worker safety a systemic issue, a legal duty for companies. And their work expanded beyond that. They recognized that the fear Suzy felt, the fear she expressed about this man from Bristol, was a red flag.
It was stalking behavior.
It was. And that led the trust to create another vital resource.
The National Stalking Helpline.
Yes. They now operate the helpline, providing advice and support to thousands of victims every year. It's a profound, life-saving legacy that was born directly out of this tragedy.
Her parents, Diana and Paul, they never got their answers, did they?
No. Tragically, they both passed away. Diana in 2011, Paul in 2018, without ever knowing for certain what happened to their daughter or where she was.
So, with Cannan now gone, what is the official status of the case? Is the file finally closed?
Suzy was declared legally dead, presumed murdered, back in 1993. But even after Cannan's death, the Metropolitan Police have stated that the case file remains open.
Why? There's no one left to prosecute.
Because the objective has changed. It's no longer a criminal investigation in the traditional sense. It's now a humanitarian one. The file stays open in the hope that one day, somehow, a piece of information will come to light that leads them to her remains.
So they can finally bring her home?
The
story of Suzy Lamplugh is just such a stark reminder that you can have the right suspect, you can have a mountain of evidence, and the justice system can still fail. But her legacy isn't the failure of the investigation. It's the success of her family in making the world a safer place. That's the real justice they achieved, isn't it?
We encourage you to subscribe to Whispers of Crime on YouTube and to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other major podcast platforms. It helps us continue to bring these important stories to light.
And if you have any information at all about this case, it is never too late. A memory of a dark BMW in Fulham in July 1986, a man with a bottle of champagne, anything you saw near the Grand Union Canal. No matter how small it seems, please contact the Metropolitan Police or you can call Crime Stoppers anonymously.
And please consider looking into the work of the Suzy Lamplugh Trust. The National Stalking Helpline is a critical resource, and their number is 08-802-0300.
The case of Suzy Lamplugh is a haunting story with an ending that offers no real closure. But it forces us to see that even when legal justice is denied, a family's fight for answers can create a legacy of safety and protection for generations to come. The question of where Suzy is remains, but the lesson of her life and her death is one we can't afford to forget.